Welcome to the Emerging Biotech Leader, where we help biotech leaders maximize the value of their therapeutics from translational development to product launch. We're your hosts. I'm Kim Kushner.
And I'm Ramin Farhad. We are here to help you navigate the pitfalls of the biotech industry and illuminate the path forward.
Welcome to today's episode of the Emerging Biotech Leader. Today, I'm so glad to welcome Dr. Thomas Lönngren, the former director of the EMA, to take a look at what the horizon for 2025 is going to look like in the industry. We're going to touch on investor trends and things that we're expecting to be key themes in the next year. We'll talk about some of the macro climate, the new administration in the United States, and some of the legislative changes both in Europe and in the US that we're expecting. We'll also touch on the pipeline overall, drugs that we expect to come to market, the impending patent cliff for some major blockbusters, and the market direction overall. Thomas, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you, Kim. Great to be here.
To start off the conversation, maybe we can kick off focused on the investor front. We've been hearing for, frankly, a couple of years now that it's been a tough environment to raise money for new biotechs to get off the ground. What trends do you really see as you're talking to other investors and different groups in the market? Are they expecting to be very optimistic in investment in 2025? Are there specific areas that you're seeing garnering greater investment than others?
Yeah, I think when it's come to investments in the biotech sector, it's probably steered by more macroeconomic events, of course. Of course, there is a lot of money out there, but if the climate in the biotech sector is not so good, and because of regulatory hurdles and other things, maybe so to say, the capital is going to other sectors in order to get better return on investment. And that is probably what we have seen over many years. And also the cost for capital is important with interest rates and things. So there is uncertainty in the future. We have a new administration in the US and we don't know really how that will ending up. So what I could read from investors and when they are talking about the future, there is some certainty of where we are going and where we're heading. But the thing is that things are more or less hanging on after the COVID and what happened when the biotech bubble burst. There are many companies out there that are struggling to get capital. And one thing is probably, if you are looking at all, I think there are 300 US biotech companies that are listed in US. And you look at all the capital they need in order to continue the development. I don't think there is risk-really capital in order to finance all 300 of them. And then you should add all the 1,000 of biotech companies from other sectors in the world. So there is a limited available of capital. There is a huge need of all the biotech sector in the world. And it's a big fight that is going on for getting access to this money, from early stage companies to mid-size companies going into phase 2, phase 3, late stage companies. And there are different success, of course, from depending on what kind of asset they have and what kind of product they have coming to market. So it will be tough for many biotech companies in the year to come in order to get capital, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And along those lines, we've been seeing an emerging group of investors, I would say, that are non-traditional biotech investors or those who historically haven't been working in the biotech space or the pharma space in general, that have now started to dabble in our arena. Do you have a perspective on what's most compelling for biotech companies that are looking for some non-traditional investment? How do they best differentiate themselves or stand out to these investors that really don't have as much context or history investing in this market?
Well, I personally don't have so much experience from, alternative investors coming in. There is, of course, a lot of family office coming in and investment in early stage companies, and the willing from them to continue to develop probably is more or less the same as always have been. If there are other sectors coming in, maybe that could be driven by what's going on with an alternative digital tools coming in, artificial intelligence coming in, which attract other kind of investors into the pharma, because many of these digital tools, artificial intelligence, of course, are used in drug development. And there we could see an influx of new investors coming in. But the use of artificial intelligence in digital health is something that is probably one of the big things for the 25. The question is how quickly it will be implemented in drug development. Probably it is not anything that will happen, in 25, and then we are in a completely digital and artificial intelligence world when it comes to drug development. It will take time. But there we could see probably there are other investors coming in. The problem with artificial intelligence and digital is that we have a history of many years of this kind of technology where it have been very difficult to get a return on investment on it, because these technologies, someone had to pay for them in the end. And of course, when it's come to digital health, that will support drug development, for example, or drug use, is the issue. How could you cover that by reimbursement and things like that? So the willingness for this other kind of venture capital company coming in is something that biotech sector have to convince them on.
Absolutely. And I could see it being both a challenge and a benefit given that, as you just described, there's over 300 biotech companies in the US alone vying for limited capital, specifically in the biotech space. But if we can expand the pool of investors, there's huge opportunity. But if we think about more tech-focused investors and those that are excited about artificial intelligence and we're excited about other digitally enabling tools, I've definitely seen a challenge for biotech companies, and especially emerging biotech companies, figure out when, where, and how to apply some of these tools in their development life cycle. The ROI is a great point. But above and beyond that, there's a skill set mismatch that most biotech leaders don't have a background and a history in technology development or AI and some of these other tools. And they struggle to balance how much do they focus current resources on some of these new tools that they try to bring into their teams versus focusing on their core competency and the trials that are directly in front of them. So how do you see that balance for biotech leaders directly playing out?
Yeah, the question is, many of these tools are available. Is the biotech company take it into their own development and start to develop their own digital tools and start to develop their own, development tools with artificial intelligence? Or are they relying on companies who are specialized in this? That's an interesting, and I think we could see both kind of development. But I think this is a golden opportunity for companies who are in this space to come and support the biotech industry and even the big pharma with these kind of technologies. And so maybe that is a growing sector in the future. And we see many of these companies, and we already have seen many deals with big pharma where they have made deals with big pharma in order to develop using artificial intelligence in a specific area and also use digital tools. So that is interesting that we maybe could have a new service sector based on digital and artificial intelligence that plug into the development of biotech sector. Or do the big pharma want to do this themselves, or some of the biotech companies want to do it themselves? But if they're doing the same with a small biotech company, they take a lot of attention away from the real drug development, because then they got other kind of problems coming in order to not only drive the drug development, that they have to drive the development of digital tools and artificial intelligence, which will put a lot of strength on a small organization, of course. So I think that is a good opportunity for service sectors in this area to plug in to the biotech sector.
I totally agree. And we've heard this in the past, and I think it probably applies here. There's kind of the quote that AI won't replace doctors, but doctors who use AI will replace doctors who don't use AI. And I do wonder if we're going to be in a similar trend for our industry, that biotechs that figure out the best way to tap into this amazing opportunity for AI and drug development and AI for improved efficiency, that those are going to be the ones who win out, and those who are going to vie for some of that competitive investment that you were referring to, that those that don't get on the bandwagon and are kind of lagging in that way are going to struggle as things continue to advance and evolve between 25, 26 in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think there are two areas where we see the digital and artificial intelligence. One is, of course, in discovery, where we have enormous amount of data, and we have so much information now that we really could use all that information in order to speed up discovery, in order to get new candidates. So there is probably is one, and there is a lot of thing going on there, as we have seen out on the market. And there are many deals that have been coming on when it's come to this kind of technology, both with smaller biotech companies and also big pharma who's coming in. I think when it's come to another area is, of course, to support the clinical trials. And, COVID took us into the remote monitoring and to do clinical trials in another way. And there is a great opportunity, I think, to use both artificial intelligence for selection or monitoring on patients and things like that. Electronic data capture is a possibility to simplify the clinical trials. And I personally have seen in the companies I'm involved in how difficult it is to run clinical trials today. Certainly get patients into the clinic in order to, with all the hustle, in order to travel and things like that. And if you are in, for example, an orphan company, orphan development, could be very difficult to transport all these patients. Very rare disease, patients are spread out over, the whole Europe, the whole US, and how to get them into clinic. And I think both FDA and EMA have reacted very positively when it's come to the possibility to use remote monitoring to get more data. So that is an area where we see some kind of rationalization in clinical trials, which is necessary because it's take too much time today and costs too much money. And that is a possibility to use this technology in a much better, both artificial intelligence and digital health.
Yeah, the remote monitoring is a great point, and one that I feel people, there are so many different vendors out there. People are trying to figure out how to best deploy it into their trials, but we know that most trials do run, behind schedule, that there's always, some hiccups that we don't plan for. So the more that we can use these tools to evolve that paradigm, I think the better the industry is going to be overall. But Thomas, you started to allude to a couple of points about how AI and drug discovery are going to impact the pipeline and new things that are coming through. Maybe we can shift gears a little bit to talk about the pipeline overall, both in terms of new drugs that we to get approvals going into next year, drugs that are coming off patent or patents that we expect to expire in the next couple of years, and some of the headwinds that organizations are facing in preparation for that. Where do you see the biggest trends relative to overall drug discovery pipeline, drugs coming into clinic, and or drugs that we expect for launches in the next couple of years?
Well, I think still, if you're looking at the applications coming into FDA and EMA, you have a lot of orphan drugs and you have oncology products. So that have been so to say steady, more than 50% of all the application in this area, more or less. But there are some trends that we could see in the last year. We see a lot of interest in the CNS area, neurodegenerative diseases. We have got some, good things happening in the Alzheimer field. We could see other fields where we see some interesting development going on. So there is a renaissance when it's come to CNS drugs for sure. And I know that because I'm involved in one of the company who are developing a new drug for treatment-resistant depression, which it's taking me into the space, of course. I'm also involved in another company developing a cell therapy for Alzheimer. So, and there's a lot of interest in this. And the unmet medical need is huge here. And of course, if the unmet medical need is huge, the market potential is also huge, of course, in this area, if you are getting. So obesity is continue to be on the top, so to say, and we have seen the success of Lilly and Novo and the success story they have. I don't know how long it will last, but at least it's driving the big pharma and their revenues enormously. So there is, of course, one area that we see. But I think immuno-oncology will continue to be dominant in the cancer field. Cell therapy will probably come back a little. We could see it certainly in combination with gene technology and gene therapy, where we will continue to see development. All the area around vaccines, RNA will continue to develop, and more interesting thing happen in the RNA area, where we see different kind of RNA and different kind of targets in order to go in to manipulate, the synthesis in the cells in order to deregulate, cutting out, for example, wrong sequence in order to stop production of a nasty protein or stimulate some protein that is not produced at all. So there's a fantastic area going on in that area. So, but I think we will see when it's come to higher numbers, we still see the oncology and the orphan drug dominate probably 40% of the applications in the year 25 to the big agencies. But everything is positive because we have never been so successful, I think, when it's come to use new technology and new science coming up. And it's fantastic to see all things going on, for sure.
And it's exciting to hear about all of this innovation. And I was recently at a conference where I heard quite a bit of the intersection of some of those pipeline areas you just referred to. In particular, when we look at some of the obesity drugs, GLP-1s in general, and their potential impact in the CNS and neurodegenerative space. What are your thoughts on some of the intersection between some of these, hot areas in the industry? Do you see more of that occurring, and how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, well, we have some early signs coming out that maybe this GLP-1 could be good in other indications also, but that remains to see, of course. It will take some time, but if that is the case, it's positive. It's positive. But hopefully it's not only there in order to generate more money for the company behind it. as an ex-regulator, I'm a little skeptical. First we need to see the evidence on it. Yeah. But but the investors are quite good in order to look into, what is the science, what will be successful, which could go to a market and things like that. So it remains to see how much money they will be prepared to put into that. And but certainly Eli Lilly and Novo will, of course, put in a lot of money in on it. And if in the end, hit the primary endpoint in a phase 3 study, and the regulators say yes, great.
Absolutely. So one thing that you started to reference as we talked about pipeline was that vaccine and RNA development will likely continue. In the US specifically, with the new kind of macro climate that we're expecting going into next year with the new administration and some legislative changes, over the last month or so since the election here in the US, vaccine stocks have dropped quite a bit, and people have been concerned about continued development and investment in that space. Can you give us some insight on the broader macro climate and some of the impacts in terms of pipeline investment, and if and where you might see some changes going into the new year?
Well, we have a new administration in the US that certainly have put a stamp on some of the issues when it comes to drug development and when it comes to medicines. And FDA already have a legislative package, what they want to do in 25. And I was just reading it, and there's a lot of things going on. And it will be interesting to see if they will be allowed to do all of it. But I think they are amending something about the 3-year exclusivity. And that they're doing it in order to get more clean, so to say, benefit of the exclusivity when it comes to innovation, and not prevent generics coming in. That will be interesting to see if that will continue. There will be a proposal for the biosimilars, which have been highlighted by the FDA, and this, with the approval of the biosimilar and the interchangeability, will change, and FDA will probably go in more direction of what Europe are doing, so that all biotech products will be interchangeable, which will be a boost, certainly for biosimilar market in US that will come up. So there's a couple of change if you're looking into it. It's a long list of change that have been flagged by the FDA, and that maybe will have a legislative change in 25.
Absolutely. And one area that might be a little bit closer to home for you, tell us a little bit more about what you're expecting out of Europe and the EMA. I know a lot of the HTA regulations go into effect next year, and many organizations, some are excited for it, some are a little bit nervous about it. How does the macro climate and the legislative changes in Europe impact the industry overall?
Yeah, certainly the biggest thing this coming year in 25 is the entry into force of the new health technology assessment legislation in Europe, which means that in parallel, more or less, with the approval of EMA, a joint clinical assessment should be done by health technology bodies in Europe. That's put together together with the European Commission, who is doing that. And I heard all the biotech companies that I'm talking with who are in the oncology field and also are in the advanced medicine therapy field to be very careful about this and look into it. Because the entry into force of the legislation will be in January, and it will be for all oncology product and advanced therapy product. Orphan drug will come in 2028, which means that even the orphan drug companies need to consider it, and all other products 2030. So One thing is to get regulatory approval, but one thing is to get pricing reimbursement and also get a good assessment of the added therapeutic value in clinical reality, which is what HTA bodies are looking at. So the evidence that you need to generate for regulators is often not enough in order to get a good outcome from a health technology body. You need to demonstrate that this drug works in a clinical reality, and you need also to demonstrate that it is a great value for the society and the patients, of course, which probably is not the same as a regulatory approval of FDA and EMA. So this is a huge thing going on in Europe, and there have been a lot of late preparations, I would say, for this legislation, but all the implementation documents should now be ready at the Commission homepage and EMA page for those companies. I think many companies need help in this because this is a new ball game for Europe, and and I see many, especially US biotech companies, are not prepared for this at all when they're going to Europe. But it's also a little more long term because now is legislation that this joint assessment, clinical assessment, must be done, which means when companies are starting to develop the drug, the clinical development program, they need to take into account not only the requirements from EMA and the FDA. They need to look into how to get a good outcome when it's come to the relative efficacy of the product compared to other products or treatments on the market, which is something different, of course, from regulatory approval. So this is huge, but this has been on the agenda in Europe for many years now. But the new thing is that instead to go to 28 countries to get different outcome what they want, now you get one assessment valid for the whole European Union. But of course, they have not gone so far that they have one decision in the European Union for pricing and reimbursement, which is still in the member states. But at least it's based on the same clinical evaluation.
I do think that's going to have some long-term ripple effects, even outside of Europe, where we've seen in the US, most organizations kind of wait to do a lot of their health economic evaluations and some of their real-world evidence work until after a submission to the agency, after they've gotten past their pivotal trial. Maybe for some orphan disease states, we see them bringing some of that thinking into the early clinical development planning, but more often than not, it's a later stage development conversation. And I see really positive outcome if this new legislation in Europe gets early biotechs to think about this in the early development life cycle, and they start worrying about it in phase 1, so that as they move through, they're not extending the timeline that they need to run these studies to, a number of years beyond their pivotal, but really embedding it in a parallel kind of process. And hopefully that has a positive impact on the industry, even though it might mean more investment needed upfront.
Well, I think it takes some time to get it to be a reality, because many of the companies are still very focused on US market. And even though that US market and the payers in US are getting closer and closer to what Europe is doing, it seems to be not so well known in many of the US biotech companies that they need to do this. And of course, there is a consequence for it, because it will cost more money. It takes longer time, probably, to do this and generate this information. In some cases, maybe not. Maybe it's quite easy to add things, so to say, in the clinical trials in order to measure something. It could be in order to save money, but in general, I think it will be at an extra cost and extra time for drug development for many companies. But on the other hand, wherever we are going in the world, regulatory approval is not the same as market access anymore. So companies need to do it.
Absolutely. So, Thomas, we've talked about some of the expectation around challenges and investment moving into next year, some of the AI surge, a little bit about the pipeline and this renaissance of CNS and neurodegenerative opportunities, as well as some of the macro climate challenges and opportunities that we expect moving into the new year. In the last moments, it'd be great to kick it to you. Are there any major predictions kind of above and beyond what we discussed that you have going into the new year that biotech leaders should be thinking about or worrying about?
More merger and acquisitions will probably be an uplift. And the ecosystem is that the big pharma, doesn't have the capacity to do all drug development themselves. So they are looking out at all the small mushrooms out there. They're growing up, and then they are picking, the best of them, and that will, of course, continue. So we have seen some merger and acquisitions this year, and I think when I'm looking into what investors are predicting, that will continue during 25. So that is another way in order to get money. Of course, reverse merger is another trend coming out in order to get the money. But as I said in the beginning, I think there is a fight out there. There is limited capital out there. There are a lot of scrutiny on where they want to put the capital, depending also on not only the science and the possibility of success of the science, but also on interest rates and where it's more profitable to put all the money. Maybe not in the biotech sector, maybe in another sector when you get a faster return. So it's interesting ecosystem there. But I think what we have seen, 23, 24 after COVID, probably continue with the same momentum during 25, probably. I don't think we are getting back to the value of biotech industry as it was before COVID. It will slowly probably recover, but it's, as I said, depending on macro things. It's depending on maybe the new administration in the US and also what's going on in Europe and other sectors, so to say. So it's a dynamic area where we really have to watch what's going on. But the good thing is that we have good science. The issue is how do we get the money to the good science? And that's the challenge. And that is the challenge for a biotech company. Because when I'm looking into a CEO of a biotech company, I have seen that many of the CEO, they are spending more than 60% of their time to talk with investors to get more money. So they need help to manage the biotech companies. And there is an interesting thing also to think about how you manage a biotech company, how you resource a biotech company when the CEO will have to focus most of his resources to get the money. And then the rest of the organization have to focus to develop the drug. So an interesting leadership challenge, I think, where different kind of roles is coming in. And one important role, as we have discovered in the SSI, is, of course, the chief medical officer. But not even the chief medical officer is able to cover all the complexity that he and her have to deal with in a biotech company. But I think around that function, I think biotech companies need to think about how they populate their organization with the right resources and put the right people in to manage everything from early development to late stage, and even when you are getting in a phase 3 and approaching a commercialization in a couple of years. It's a lot of things to think about in a biotech company. And I've seen that in the biotech companies I'm involved as a board member. It's very interesting. Both companies are in late stage, and we are, of course, starting to focus on the commercial aspects now, but we have not get the regulatory approval yet. And after the regulatory regulatory approval is the pricing reimbursement and get a good price in both US and Europe market. So it's quite interesting to see the demand of a biotech company. And I think companies like SSI, we have the resources in order to help the biotech company to plug in where they have competence and resources that is missing. I think that is a very effective way in order to run a biotech company.
Yeah, I appreciate that insight, especially about the resourcing challenges and how much time CEOs have to take really away from running the business in order to fund and maintain the business and solvency in the long term. But I agree, there is so much great science and so much to be excited for, but also a lot to watch going into the new year. So we'll definitely be watching very closely and looking forward to having you back in a future episode to talk more about what we've seen and what's really come true from all of these predictions. So Thomas, thank you so much for joining today and for some of the great insights you've shared.
Thank you, Kim. Great to be here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Emerging Biotech Leader, an SSI strategy podcast. Join us each month for more conversations with biotech leaders. If you'd like to help navigating the complexities of biotech, reach out to our team at ssistrategy.com. Don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a review.